Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Rachel Hanson. Rachel is a builder with the leadership development group Built to Lead. But prior to that, she headed a nonprofit for several years. And prior to that was a college softball coach working with some of the most successful programs in the nation for over a decade. This is a special one for me because Rachel is actually my builder. So for those who've been listening to the podcast for a long time, I have often referred to Built to Lead or the name Chet Scott, who I've been working with in a group setting. He's done group leadership development at my company, Lockton, for a long, long time. And about 18 months before this was recorded, I made the decision that I wanted to go a little deeper into that work. And I had some exposure to Rachel and interviewed her and somebody else and wound up deciding to go with Rachel. And we've been working together on a weekly basis since that time and I've seen some major breakthroughs in my thought patterns, in the stories I tell myself about myself and about the life I'm living. And she's really helped me navigate some difficult situations and some trivial ones too, as we kind of joke about in this conversation. But I think the work that we talk about here can be really, really impactful for people. And I hope it's really impactful for you. We talk a lot in here about different reflection or journaling exercises. Wherever you start, like don't let all of this altogether intimidate you. We talk a little bit about this at the end. Just start small, but the work in here and some of the questions that she prompts you with really, really can be impactful. So that's my little soapbox for this. I love Rachel. I'm so thrilled to share her with you all. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here is Rachel Hanson. Rachel, welcome to the show. I am excited to have you here. I have obviously been working with you closely for a long time, but as you just pointed out, this will be a little bit of a role reversal. Usually you're asking me the questions, and today I get to ask you the questions. So welcome. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like I better watch out because I might get my payback here.
There you go. Well, now I get to like crack your head open a little bit and see how it works. I've seen the result of how it works, but now I get to take the mechanism apart a little bit.
Let's go.
So I've had Chet Scott on here, and we did a great episode on Built to Lead, and we got into some core work. For anyone who's interested in that, we'll link that in the show notes. That might be a good precursor to this. But how do you describe Built to Lead and the work that you do? Let's just start there.
So, I think it depends a little bit on who I'm talking to and what their interest level actually is. If it's just a cocktail party intro, I just tell them I work with people to help them figure out who they are, what they believe, why it matters, and do more of that on purpose, as Dolly Parton would say. If they're actually interested and want to know a little bit more, in my mind, there's two ways I split it out. I think the first way is the framework itself, which is Chet's masterful distillation of ancient wisdom, right? I don't think there's anything super secret in it. It's just he looked at what do humans do across time? What have successful humans done and why do humans function the way they do? And he distilled it down into, I'm sure they can listen to that episode and get clarity on the framework, which is working on yourself, working on your core, sitting alone in a room and figuring out who am I and what do I believe? So I think that's the framework itself. I think the other half of it is the relationship with a builder and the person they're building into. Chet's my builder. Obviously, I build into you. And I think that to me is more of the quote unquote secret sauce, which is someone coming alongside you who's totally interested in you, kicking your ass, making you better, studying humans and humans generally, and you as a human specifically, and then trying to figure out where can we help you get more clarity? Where's the work you need to do? And on a week-to-week basis, how do we come up with a couple of productive actions that move you closer to your dream state?
I love that. And how did you get introduced to Built to Lead in the first place?
I was a college softball coach for 12 years, kind of bopped around the country and got out of college coaching, which is a whole different conversation, and came to St. Louis, ran a nonprofit for a couple of years. There's another guy in St. Louis, David Deck. He does the same work. We were introduced by someone on my board. And immediately when he was explaining what he did, I was like, I need that. I need more clarity. So he and I started doing the work. And then, I don't know, maybe 3 to 6 months in, I turned to him one time and was like, hey, I think maybe I want to do what you do. And he's like, yep, been waiting for you to say that. And off we went.
Very cool. Very cool. And how long ago was that now?
I was probably 7 years ago-ish. Maybe. Yeah, probably about 7.
This might be getting too ahead, but what is different about how you do your building now versus when you started 7 years ago?
Good question. I mean, I think, so much of what we do is pursuit of mastery. So much of what anyone does if they're pursuing excellence in an endeavor is mastery. So I think the biggest difference in how it looks is I just have an expanded toolkit, but B, so much more patience. I think patience to sit and listen and not be exactly sure where the practice is going, but trusting that it's going to go somewhere important. And then I think you combine that with just the more I know about myself, the better I can build into another. I know more about how I tick. Specifically, I'm a challenger at my core, and how I do that, not carelessly, not just throwing punches and being a jerk, but with precision, finding the weak spots, ripping off the scab, so to speak, and kind of digging towards that pain to eradicate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. It does make sense. And it was funny. I was laughing because, as you know, there's somebody in my life who I've wanted to help. And so I've kind of started to build into this person. And you and I were prepping my first conversation with that person. And one of the best pieces of advice you gave me in that prep was just be patient and don't judge.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this isn't what you think this person needs to be doing. This is what's going on in them, and just really tune into what's going on with them. And I think we often sit down with other people, especially when we're going to coach them, especially if they didn't ask for the coaching.
Yeah.
If we're just trying to help correct somebody's behavior on our team or something like that, we can often just sit down and assume we know the problem without giving them blank space to let us know what's going on in their lives. And it was just starting from that point in that initial conversation, like, totally put us on a right path.
I love that. And I think that's, if I had to, well, maybe not the number one thing, but certainly a top thing with any leader is stop being the answer guy, the answer gal, stop being the problem solver, and learn to be patient and figure out how to help others solve their own problems. But when we're paid to solve problems, it's really hard to flip your mindset into not being a problem solver.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine, like, getting into this work, one of the things you liked about it is you get to solve people's problems. You get to help people solve their problems. Mm-hmm. And I imagine you were probably pretty good at seeing what the problems were.
Well, and as a college coach in particular of 18 to 22-year-olds, you're just so used to fix this, change this, adjust this, move this, whatever, right? Like that's the gig.
That's the job, yeah.
And I think towards the end of my career, started to get a little bit better at that, of stepping back and asking more questions, but still had a long way to go. And I think you're right. That was one of the biggest things that I had to challenge myself with, was slowing down, not assume less, ask a lot more.
Yeah. What do people get wrong in the beginning about the work that you do? Like, what are the misconceptions?
You mean as a potential client in particular, or just anyone?
Yeah. I guess when people hear what you do, what are the misconceptions that they have?
So there's probably two different sides of that. One is misconception about what they would do, which is, I think often they think, okay, I'm going to sit back and you're going to tell me what needs to be fixed. You're going to help me see what I'm missing and then tell me what to do about it, right? Which, as we just talked about, is very little of the work.
Yeah.
To a amusingly frustrating level. I mean, there have been times where you've been like, can you stop asking me and just tell me, right? That's pretty common, especially early on.
Yeah. And
then I think from what they assume is different about my side of the work is, you just kind of show up. Your life is your own. There's not a lot to do. Just show up, tell people what to do, versus not seeing, I think, the messier back end of that, of, if I'm going to build into others, I first got to build in myself. Chet's my builder, right? And I'm having to do the work at double the pace of what I would expect from any client. So it's a lot of, mastery, time alone in the studying, learning, applying. But that's also what I love to do, fortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. And it is funny, people who I think we often are looking for somebody just to tell us what to do. But, anybody who has had people tell them what to do, like we're not good at doing it. And in fact, when somebody tells us what to do too much, we rebel against it. And so there is that struggle of having a good coach or a good builder is somebody who gets you to tell yourself what to do.
That's right. That's right. We ask it all the time. Whose voice do we listen to the most? It's our own, and it's not even close. So my voice is going to have a minuscule effect on your life compared to your own voice.
Yeah. And this isn't meant to be a sales pitch for you, but the reason that I hired you in the first place was that I'm a pretty introspective guy, and I had been working with Chet in a group setting through Locked-In for a couple years, and I like introspective work. As anyone who's listened to this knows, I journal, I was doing the core work, I was doing all of that. And I was sitting there being like, okay, I'm good at this. I should be able to figure out my own problems. And to some extent, I was probably able to get pretty far. But even still, there's an element to having somebody sit there, even if they're not going to tell you what to do, just helping direct your attention to things that either you're not paying attention to or that are maybe scary to pay attention to or painful to pay attention to, just helping you keep your attention on something that you wouldn't otherwise go to. Like there's incredible value in that, even if you know what to do. And even if you kind of get the general sense, having somebody sit there and help you guide that attention is incredibly powerful.
I think that's right. That's spot on. And we'll get into this, I'm sure, at some point, but we're often also not entirely aware, or at least not fully fleshed out aware of the stories that we tell ourselves. So, just being able to be like, okay, well, you've got a baked in assumption there. Is that assumption true? And the person being like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I was making that assumption that is foundational to this whole argument I've made with myself.
Yeah. So let's go there, because that is where I want to spend a good amount of time today, because I think it's one of the things that you and I have worked on the most, or like, what are the stories that I tell myself, and are those stories true? And often the stories that have kept me from being where I want to be, turns out they're not true. And by reframing those stories, I've been able to do a lot more in the last 18 months than I thought I would be able to do. So let's talk about that. One is just, how do we unearth the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves? Like, what is the process for figuring out what our running narrative is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the first answer we always go to in BTL is writing. If you can slow down, the brain moves so fast, right? We have somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 thoughts that go through our brain every hour. So the chances of catching every important one are pretty small, because our brain just, it spins so fast, right? So slowing down to write, to start to formulate clear lines, when you write, it literally slows your brain down. So I think the more we can do that, the more we can start to be aware of trends we're seeing, of stories we're telling ourselves, et cetera. I think the other is, whether it's a builder or just a good friend, a truth teller, someone who can say, hey, what do you mean by that? What's going on? Like, just asking good questions of you. And then in the third, I think so many of the stories that we miss are stories because they've been there so long. So slowing down, we'll talk about discovery at some point, but slowing down to say, well, what are some of my foundational stories? What are things that my parents told me about myself, or teachers told me about myself, or tough things I went through early on that shaped how I think about life? And then slow down and take a look at, are those assumptions true? Are they serving me the way that I'm thinking about myself? And if not, what do I want to do differently with them?
So you kind of tease the discovery there. What is that? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So discovery is 82 questions. It's where we start with a client. So before we take on a client, they got to fill out those 82 questions and send it to us. And that kind of kicks off our working relationship. It's part filter, who really does want to do the work, but far more importantly, it's a directional information, right? So we're wanting to figure out where you want to go, But if we're going to know that, we got to know where you are right now. And if we're going to actually know where you are now, it's not a static data point. It's directionally has come from a certain direction, right? It's you've have baked in assumptions that have led you to this point. Maybe you're on this trajectory, maybe you're on this trajectory. We don't know, but what are all those forces prior to that have kind of brought you to this specific point you're in now? So discovery just digs into what are some of those childhood voices in your head? What are hard things you've been through? What do you believe about why you're here? What do you believe about right and wrong? Whatever it might be. And we start to tease out what are those stories you tell yourself and why are they there? It's a starting point for us.
Yeah. It was funny. I was smiling when you said, we make everybody do this, because I did it voluntarily when I first started working with Chet. And then when I hired you, I was like, oh shit, I got to do this again.
Yeah.
And so, I've done whatever it is, 84 questions. Or no, I'm sorry, 164 questions.
Yeah.
164 questions. What are some of your favorite discovery questions or the most insightful discovery questions that you get a new client, they send you all the discovery, like what are the ones you go to first?
So when I first open it up, inevitably the one I scroll to is, I think it's the very last one. What's the hardest thing you've ever been through and how'd you get through it? Because it tells me two things. One, how real and raw are they, right? If they say like, broke up with a girlfriend when I was 16. Okay, well, we've probably got some work to do to have you really get to the hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
But then it also tells me that's usually where I'm going to start is some form of pain. And we're going to just hunt like a guide dog on a hunt. We're going to try to sniff it out early and hard and see if we can pull off some of those scabs to get to the things that most hold you back. So that's the one I inevitably scroll to and look at first. Then generally throughout discovery, I'm looking for what are themes that keep popping up. Is it someone start somewhat recently who his relationship with his dad kept popping up in there. And there was clearly, he didn't get very specific, but there's clearly some stuff there. And so our very first practice together, we dug into that. And sure enough, man, he did some hard work around that in the first 3 practices that just set him free from some stuff he'd been carrying for a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades.
Yeah. Okay. So you dove into that. So this is a theme, right? Let's say somebody listening to this and they go like, no, I know the theme. Like here's the theme. A lot of us know the big ones. What is the work in those first few sessions look like that helped that person let that go? Because that sounds like magic to somebody who's been carrying something for, a decade or more, as a lot of us have been carrying something for a long time. What is that? What does that work look like? What are you doing? What is that person doing? Yeah.
So have you ever seen the documentary Meru?
Yes.
Climbing documentary?
Yes. But explain it for listeners.
Yeah. So it's a climbing documentary of a first ascent, Meru, first time this mountain has ever been summited. So it's their kind of journey to summit it.
Yes.
And when he gets up to the very top, I don't even remember the guy's name, but when he gets up to the very top, it's a shale face. And so they have to take out, I don't even know if it was little hammers or what, but they start tapping around before they put in a hook of any sort, before they handhold. They just start tapping around to figure out, is this shale, is this going to hold, or is this a more solid hold that I can actually grip onto? And that stuck with me because to me, that's so much of what we do with clients, especially in the early days, is we're just kind of tapping. Like I read your discovery and I make some assumptions. Okay, I'm going to make a judgment here that there's probably a lot of pain that you haven't dealt with in this relationship that you wrote about. So then I just start tapping. And I might find, okay, actually it was pretty shored up in this area. You've dealt with it. But over here, it's a lot less shored up. It's a lot more of a false front, right? So we start tapping at that and even pulling off the face of it to just, how do we get to the root of this? The root of whatever it is that's, whatever story you started to tell yourself about this. And really all it is me asking a lot of questions early on, right? So I want him to slow down and share with me the actual story. And then as he's telling this story, I'm listening for where is there either lack of clarity or pain that he hasn't touched.
What might lack of clarity sound like?
So lack of clarity, I'll use this as an example. I heard some things like, I just decided I didn't want to talk to him after that. And, I haven't talked to him since. Okay, well, I don't hear a lot of clarity about why or why that's a good decision or what fundamental belief you have about cutting off family members, which is the right thing to do at times. But I didn't hear clear why. I just heard pain, right? It was something essentially I was hearing, I want to shove this in a room, close the door, and not think about it. I heard pain, obviously, but the lack of clarity of why you would want to then cut off that relationship, I just didn't hear it.
Yeah.
I didn't hear clarity around why this person wasn't telling others in their life about how this relationship had impacted them. So we just dug into a lot of that and asked him to write about it a lot. And he did, and realized that while he was not wanting to reopen that relationship, he was wanting to share with more people in his life and let go of the burden of feeling like others might judge him for that.
Yeah. It hit me because I've been trying to think as we've been having this conversation and even in prep for this. Not everybody's going to want to go out and get a builder. Not everybody's going to be able to. But I do think doing this work on your own, you can get really far. Like I got pretty far. I was able to make some breakthroughs on my own, just having this kind of group guided work with Chet and just listening to what he said and in a group setting, not actually building into me one-on-one. And I think people can take a lot from this. And I hope that they do. And it would seem like if you can find anybody who's a trusted source, your spouse, a sibling, a parent, something like that, and do some of this writing, like you could even just set this up and say, hey, this is going to be weird, but I want you to just look at what I've like this story that I'm telling myself and just ask me whatever questions come to mind. Like where is this unclear? What questions do you have? Just getting somebody who can, if you can sit there and neutrally look at what you've written and ask yourself questions on it, that's great. But having anybody be able to just sit there and put a clear set of eyes on it and ask you questions on it just prompts different thinking and just helps you go deeper and deeper and deeper into this kind of stuff. I
think that's right on. And I would have for that is if you can trust them to be a truth teller, that also levels the game up, right?
Yeah.
I love my mom. I wouldn't go to my mom for this. She would tell me, that's just wonderful writing. I think you figured out everything, right? She would want to make me feel good. Yeah. And I appreciate that about her. That is my mom. She is a sweetheart. I want someone who will look at it and be like, that doesn't make sense. Why did you write that? Or this doesn't line up with how I know you to be. Why is that at odds? Right? Someone who's willing to just speak more truth to me is where I think anyone would probably find real value in exposing these stories. Yeah. All right. So let's keep our example going here because I think it's a good one. A lot of people have family issues, but you can extrapolate it to anything, right? So let's say we've done some writing. We have answered some questions about ourselves. We've written out our beliefs. How do we change them though? Like it's one thing to know them. It's another thing to change them, and letting go of a part of ourselves or letting go of a story we tell ourselves about who we are, changing an identity, it has to be some of the hardest work to do. And yet I've seen you do it with me. So what's the secret sauce in how we actually make any progress with this once we know what it is? Well, why don't we dig into you a little bit and let's use you as an example. How about that? Ooh, flip it back. Can you think are there any ones that pop in your head? Identity statements that we've worked on? Identity statements. Or a belief. We could use a belief too. Yeah, I don't have as many identities that I've changed in our work. My identities, I think, were pretty clear. It was more the beliefs I had that have changed. And so like kind of a trivial example, but one that's had a big impact is there's some precedent in our organization that when you get to a certain size of book of business that you can invest in a team member to come on board and support you. And it's something that the person in my chair pays for, but it's an investment in yourself to kind of level up what you can do from a sales and retention standpoint. And I had a lot of beliefs in my head that told me very clearly that I was not in a position to make that investment. Both because the investment was large and because I didn't think my sales were high enough. I didn't think my overall client roster was big enough.
there were several beliefs where I was like, I believe that this is when it makes sense to make this investment.
Mm-hmm. So where I always start out, like someone gives me a litany of thoughts like that, and it starts out with just tell me more, right? Because I want to understand not just the endpoint statements, but what's your thought process behind all of these?
Yeah. Why do you believe what you believe?
Right. Why do you believe what you believe? What's the story you're telling yourself about why now isn't a good time to invest? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as we dug into you more and more, we started to see, okay, you've got some, it's probably safe to say, fears there around what if you make the wrong decision?
Yep.
What if this slows you down too much for your financial goals?
Yep.
Are those two that sound familiar?
Yeah, those sound familiar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what if I bring this person on and then I can't fill their time and now I've, promised them something I can't deliver?
Mm-hmm. So do you remember what we started to do from there?
It was really just to tell me more. It was from my recollection and just doing more writing on each of those areas.
That's right.
Why do you believe that to be true? And then I can't remember if that was, or others, if it was from that area or other areas of work, but I do remember you asking at one point, what are other things about that could also be true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So we first started to just slow down and what are the beliefs driving this belief? Right.
Yeah.
And you had some self-limiting ones in there, ones that weren't actually getting you where you wanted to go. Right. Well, I can't invest until I reach X amount. I can't take someone on when the risk is that I might not fill their time. So then we just started to flip those around. Well, we know humans overvalue risk. That is just a part of our wiring, a part of our DNA. It's, I would argue, what kept us alive, likely from an evolutionary sense, right? Mm-hmm. We overvalue risk. So we don't eat the berry that might be poisonous. We stay away from the lion pack, right? But in a day-to-day life, we trust our brains way too much. So we have these thoughts just running around that we don't examine, that when we slow down and examine them, we're like, oh, wait a second. I wouldn't have to be in this relationship forever. Oh, hold on a second. Well, let me look and see if I wrote out what they would do. Do I actually think that would fill up their oh, yeah, that probably would. Okay, great. So you just start to examine and realize that your brain was over-assessing the risk and under-assessing the possible benefit of it. And as soon as your brain realized that, you're like, oh, okay, done. Let's go find the right person.
Yeah. Well, that's the weird part about this. And I'm curious if this is just what you see. So I did a lot of that work. And what I realized is it takes 18 to 24 months to really ramp this type of role up till you're really humming it at full capacity. And if I looked at where I was, okay, maybe I wasn't quite where I thought I needed to be, but did I think I was going to be there in 2 years? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So did I want to wait until I got really, really crammed and really stressed, or did I want to do it now and build up into that position? And then also, to your point, I actually sat there and was like, okay, what would I have this person do? Mm-hmm. And why would I have them do that? And what would be the point of bringing this person on? And I got a lot of clarity through that around things about my job that I'm not the greatest at, and the things in my job that I am pretty good at. And I said, well, if I can just build this job description and have this person do all the things I'm not good at, 1, I'm more productive. 2, I'm having more fun. 3, we should be able to sell more business and grow and service more clients. And so it was wild at how easily that belief fell away, if that makes sense. And it's, I don't know that I would believe it if I was listening to this, because again, it kind of sounds like magic, but it was like, if you do the work to gain solid belief in the other story, not that you're just trying to get yourself to believe a story, but if you actually build a real story that is true, that counters the other one, it's really easy to let the other one go. It's really hard to let the other one go when you don't have a replacement story.
That's right.
But if you've done the work to build a really strong replacement story that you really believe in, it's almost like the other one just sort of like, it's like a train, like it just like decouples itself.
Yeah. Well, and there's roots of this in positive psychology, right? Martin Seligman, his discoveries of things like disputing your thoughts, right? You can't just, your brain is smart enough to know if you're just BSing, right? If you're just saying, oh, well, I'll just believe this thing. But if you can actually find evidence to dispute your thoughts, okay, well, now you can make some real behavioral change, because now your brain will go, oh, okay, here's why I can trust that I don't have to think this thing, or I don't have to behave this way.
Yeah.
So I think you essentially writing created evidence for yourself that this was a better path for you.
Yeah. Well, and I actually looked at evidence. I went out that our company has done a whole study on this particular role, when it works, when it doesn't, what the ramp up is, what the investment should be, what these people do for different people. And so I was able to actually look at all this real research and go like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. There's all this other stuff in here that does directly apply to me. And so doing that and the writing together, both of those really helped build that case. And for anyone who's wondering, about 9 months ago, I actually hired this person, and she's been on the team for that whole time, for this whole year. And together we have increased every KPI that I had set out for her to increase. So it short term, it looks like it's paying off. And from the research I've seen, it doesn't really pay off for 18 to 24 months. So I'm very excited about the investment that I did make.
Yeah, I love that. It's been a fun journey to watch you go on. I think the other thing that strikes me about this too, that was, I believe, a prior discovery that you made as you're doing some of this work, is this tendency you have sometimes to push off decisions until you're just so sure that they're the right one.
Yes.
Right. And I think
that's
back
accurate.
To what was it that you were thinking about purchasing? A pillow, wasn't it? Yeah. You want to tell that story?
Well, I can't remember if I told that on here or not, but I'll tell it again. So it actually goes back. I'll tell a different story. When my wife and I were first dating, I wanted to buy a new winter coat, and we went to Macy's, I think it was, in Chicago. And for some reason, they had winter coats in 2 sections that were at either end of this of Macy's. And Macy's in Water Tower Place in Chicago is a big place. And it was probably a 3-minute walk between each one. And I must have gone back and forth 6 times, 7 times between the two. I don't know why I didn't just bring one coat to the other rack, but I'm a rule follower, so I didn't. And Caitlin told me after we got married, she told me that at that moment she knew that it was going to be a slow build for our relationship.
That's funny.
Because she was like, oh my God, if this is how this person makes decisions. And then you and I were talking, and I wanted to buy a new pillow. And it was funny, like that was my writing for the week. I was writing on this, and like, why I was so frustrated that I couldn't just figure this out. And I was doing all this research and whatever. I think you just asked me the one question of like, well, couldn't you just return it? I was like, yes, I could just return it. And I think I wound up buying, in like a month period, I think I bought 3 or 4 different pillows, and 3 of them came, and I just right away, I was like, nope, send them back. And then one came, and I was like, oh my God. And that's still the one that I sleep on. I've actually bought it for my sister-in-law. She was complaining about not having a pillow. And I just unbeknownst to her, I just went to my old emails and I pulled it up and I bought another one and had it shipped to her. Cause I was like, let me save you some time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that now when I make a decision, I have a totally different thought process. It took a while to train that thought process, and I still will catch myself being like, oh, I gotta do all this research. And it's like, wait, can I return this? Yeah. Okay. The stakes on this are actually really, really low. Let's err on the side of action.
That's right. So I think you said a couple of really important things in there. One is, kind of this, we're talking about identity here, right? Think less, do more. You're someone who really wants to think through, kind of a maximizer. Can I make the right decision? Can I get enough data points to know this is the right decision? So for you, some of the work was, how do you learn to lean against that tendency? Because it can get overcooked.
Yeah.
So think a little less, do a little more. For someone who just loves to fire at the hip and just make decisions nonstop, and they're rarely good ones, we'll practice leaning the opposite way, where you need to slow down. You need to write a lot more before you act. And I think you've learned, you've got really clear beliefs about when you should slow down big decisions, PR, teammate, hiring your new teammate, that's an impactful decision. So it makes sense to slow down, to write a lot, to be clear, and then to act. Buying a pillow, act less than you think.
Yeah. You know, what's funny though, too, even in the small decisions now, I still will often do just a little bit of writing. And that helps me as the thinker to say, like, what's important about this decision?
Good.
And I'll just say it's important that the pillow is comfortable, but not too plush where my head hits the ground. It needs to be sustainable. It can't cost $500 and it needs to be king size, like, okay, great. Well, let's just go narrow the search down to that. Let's take the first viable one that seems like it could be a fit. Let's buy that. It'll be here in 2 days. Nope. All right. I'm shipping that one back before that one even goes into the mail. I bought the next one, and it's just like and that speeds it way up. But now I know even just that little writing about what are the parameters that I'm using to make this decision, that helps me just, click those off. That's
right. Well, that's a qualitatively different question than what's the right pillow for me, right? Asking what's my aim with this pillow, it can be a lot more focusing than what's the right pillow, because there's literally, I'm sure, millions of options for the right pillow.
Yes. The more we say pillow, the more it sounds like it's not a word. You know when that happens?
Yeah.
But I mean, as trivial as this is, like, we make decisions all the time. And one of the things that Chet talks about, and I've heard you talk about it too, is like the most successful people make the most decisions. Like, they're just acting all the time, making decisions, moving things forward. And if you can always be moving things forward and taking action, a lot of good things fall out of that. A lot of failure falls out of that, but a lot of good things too. If you can be primed for that and actually have a methodology for making those decisions and doing this kind of work for decisions beyond just a pillow, it just helps you be more successful in every decision that you're making.
Yeah. No, that's right.
Anything else that we haven't covered on this concept of changing the stories that we tell ourselves? Because again, I think this is just such an important topic for human beings. We are all held captive by the stories that we tell ourselves. And I know, I mean, I've had a lot of progress and breakthroughs with you in the work that we've done, but I know there's more, right? Like, this is not something that ever stops. You never like break through into utopia. We're kind of always formulating these stories, and we're always having reactions to the things that go on. And I just see people get into trouble, or I see people behaving badly or in ways detrimental to their own success, just because they have some story about who they are, about how the world works, and they can't challenge that story.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that strikes me as you're talking about that too is so much of this is play, is learning to not take ourselves so seriously, learning that our brain is not actually who we are. I think for me, that was a big unlocking. I remember early in this work with David, where I just suddenly had the realization that I don't have to listen to my brain. My brain does not get to dictate. I can have this, in this case, it's the core that we've literally written down. Here's what I believe. Here's who I am. And I can argue back with my brain and tell my brain, no, I'm not going to do that thing because I don't believe that anymore. It takes practice, because your brain still wants to be a jerk and tell you, no, you got to be afraid. You got to do this way, behave this way. But the more I can play with that and not take it so seriously, the more I think fun it becomes to see, well, okay, what else can I experiment with? What is serving me? What's not? And what do I want to try changing? And I don't have to keep that change.
Yeah. Have you heard the analogy of your brain with the rider and the elephant? So it's basically your conscious brain is the rider and your unconscious brain is the elephant. And
I've heard this, yeah.
It's like your conscious brain can lead and guide the elephant where it wants it to go. But if something jumps out and spooks your subconscious, like, that elephant's going to do what the elephant wants to do. And so it's just the real power is in the elephant, but the rider has all of this ability to control and influence what is happening. And I think there's like two elements to that. Like, one, just being a really savvy rider is sort of the first part of this work, and just being able to corral some of these thoughts that are just floating around in there, that we feel them very strongly. And so therefore we assume that we think them very clearly. And those two things are not connected. Like the strong feelings we have often have very thin actual substance.
Truth.
And that's why writing is so important. But I think the other part of the rider and the elephant is like a really great rider. And when we talk about mastery, is somebody who can train their elephant not to spook at things that spooked it before. And to help the elephant walk through different terrain, go through different scenarios, deal with different enemies. Like, I think if you can train that elephant, and that's, I think, what a lot of this story work is. The first level is like, let's just get control of this thing before it gets out, before we cause some damage. But the second part is, let me actually train it, retrain it with some of these core beliefs. Let me feed it some different food. Let me show it some different ways of behaving so that we can have better outcomes.
I think that's right on. And let's stick with that analogy for a second, because I think, awareness is so much a piece of this. And I think early on, you're starting this work, whether it's with a builder or on your own, you might not even realize something's wrong until the elephant has rampaged, spooked and rampaged and knocked over houses and left an emotional devastation, right? And then you're like, holy mackerel, what just happened? Why did I get so angry, upset, hurt, whatever? So you go sit down and you write, and you realize, oh, it was that thing, that mouse on the sidewalk that spooked me, right? It might be, just had a hard conversation last week with my wife about finances that I realized I've got a belief in there that I wasn't as clear on, that I got a little spooked, and I got frustrated in a finances conversation with her. Okay, so I slowed down and wrote, right? Fortunately, it was before devastation occurred. But that's then the goal. Rather than catching it after the fact, now that I'm aware, can I start to catch it? Maybe I catch it halfway through the ride, or maybe I catch it right as they spook, and I start to catch it earlier until eventually I find myself, oh, you know what? I've gone past that mouse 10 times and I haven't spooked once. Yeah. That's when you start to realize, oh, my core is now dictating rather than my brain dictating.
Yeah. Well, and I think I like the way you explain that, because most of the time we are not going to be able to catch it for the first time before it happens.
That's right.
Like we're only going to be made aware of this because of some havoc that was wrought by
some form of pain.
Elephant. Yeah. Like we screamed at our spouse or our kids, or we lashed out at somebody, or we, whatever the case might be, drank too much. But to be able to stop and be like, all right, why did that happen? What was that trigger? How often does that happen? And just start to really, like we talked about at the beginning, just like really question that behavior and then question the beliefs behind that behavior. That, I think, then lets you catch it midterm. And I've seen this with my wife, where there are some things that she would do that would really trigger me, that were ongoing issues for us. And not that we cleared all of those away, but there are definitely some now where then I would write about it, and then she would do something, and I would sort of catch myself in the middle of it. And then I would be able to explain to her why I was having the reaction I was having. And then we did more work and unpacked that stuff, and wound up actually getting to a point where I could feel it coming before it would happen. And then I would address it. And I think the first time I even did, I didn't address it in a great way, even though I was trying to preempt it. And then we got better at that. And it's this constant iteration of this. Right. You don't need to be perfect, but you just need each time, if you can just move a little bit left of bang, right? Left of the incident each time, then you're making progress, and eventually, in probably a shorter period than you think, be behaving much better.
Totally. Two things there that hit me as you're saying that. One is, we're trying to get to the why, the root why of so many of these. And I think a helpful tool that I use with you in some version or another all the time, but you can also use on your own, is going 5 whys deep.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, why did that upset you so much? Whatever your answer. It upset me because, my wife was attacking me about finances. Well, why did it feel like attacking? Well, it felt like attacking because I didn't feel as prepared as I wanted to be. Well, why didn't you feel prepared? Right. So you're just going with yourself 5 whys deep. And so there'll eventually be one that you write that you're like, oh, that's the thing. And suddenly your brain will know you hit on something. That's the nugget that you need to then write more about, uncover what's the belief there. And then, and you hit on this and what you were just sharing, then it's about practice, right? You're not going to change a behavior whether you're Tiger Woods with his golf swing or anyone else, you don't change a behavior just because you realize you want to flip it. You change it by practicing doing it
by
differently.
Practicing the change.
That's right. And if you're going to get great at anything, you're going to start out sucking at it. So your first time is usually going to be pretty bad. And then you just keep going until it gets great.
So along those lines, for somebody who's thinking about this, like we're kind of in the deep end of the pool right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see somebody listening to this being like, this is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that the work is worth the return if my life seems to be kind of fine. And yeah, I got issues. Everybody's got issues. You know, I don't know about this. I can just see, I could see somebody thinking that. So on the concept of iterating and exploring and practicing, where do you recommend people start when it comes to this type of writing? What's the progression of getting deeper and deeper into that for somebody that might not be quite as scary as if they just were listening to what we just said and be like, I wouldn't even know how to do that?
Good question. This can be as easy as starting out with a prompted book. Obviously, Chet's got his Becoming Built to Lead book, which is great. But there's also some of the Stoic practice books that are out now can be great for this kind of thing. Just asking questions that make you think a little more deeply. Anytime I have a taste test with a potential client, I'm listening for two things. I'm listening for pain and I'm listening for a dream. If I go in and there's no real, and you're saying, man, I'm in pretty good shape. I've dealt with all my pain. There's not much I want to change. And I'm living my dream. I'm going to say, great, keep going. Have you ever hit on something that you can't handle and you want to talk? Great, pick up the phone, no problem. But usually when people, I've yet actually to have someone, when they slow down and really write, that there isn't some pain in their life that's unresolved. Either it might be as simple as, man, my team isn't doing what I want them to do, which we know is always a reflection of the leader, either encouraging or permitting behavior, right? So it starts with a leader, means you've got work to do. Or my life's pretty good, but man, my real dream is that I could do X, Y, Z. Okay, well, why haven't you taken action on that? Let's write about that. So usually pain in those, because it's usually until you deal with the pain, you can't even really get clear on the dream. But one of the two, when people slow down and write, they usually see, man, I'm not actually where I want to be. Sounds like a harsh one, but I'm fond of saying it because I found it to be true. Most people are sleepwalking through life. And I mean that with all the love in the world, in the sense that we're all kind of waiting for a moment of truth that rattles us, wakes us up, right? We hope it's not something you hear people say all the time, man, I got cancer. And suddenly I realize life is precious and I want to do things totally different. My hope is that someone doesn't wait for one of those moments of truth and they start doing the hard work to get clear on who they are, what they believe, why it matters, and live more of that on purpose before there's a, existential crisis to threaten them.
So this is something that I've struggled with a long time, and I'm curious what your answer would be here. I don't know that we've talked about this directly, but doing this kind of work sounds great and empowering, but a reaction to it can be fear, because what if the answer is that I'm living the wrong life, right? I think there's a fear that everybody wants something more, but I've got this thing and it's kind of safe and it's secure, and going out and doing something else is a risk. So what do you say to those people who shy away because they're afraid that their true calling is something else and it would require this major change and this huge disruption and all this risk to go do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got my personal beliefs around that, which is that on the other side of fear is just joy, peace, contentment if you do the work. So I'm such a strong believer, both because of my experience and watching clients and clients of other builders do this work, that whatever the fear is, on the other side of it is things are just so much better. But I also recognize that until you do that, it's hard to believe that. So any conversation like that would more start with, well, let's talk about what it is that you're afraid of. For some people, it might be, to your point, I'm afraid that then I'll feel like I got to leave this security blanket of this job that pays me well. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Built to lead does not mean jumping out of a window without a parachute, right? It means, okay, well, if safety, security, you've got a family, you've got mouths to feed. Okay, great. Then let's slow down and talk about, you've now got clarity that this is not the job you want, and instead you'd rather be in this field. Well, let's figure out what are the steps on that path to move you in that direction. not to just take a running leap out the window. And again, it goes back to what we've been talking about throughout this whole thing is when you slow down and actually start to write it out, the fear, it starts to lose its power. You start to realize that you're probably overvaluing the risk and undervaluing what you might get out of it.
Yeah. It's as weird as this sounds, it can be terrifying to write down in a piece of paper that you could burn and throw away the thing that you are afraid of. And I found that because as you know, I always wrestle with the question of like, what's my highest and best calling, which is a great question to ask, but it can also hold you back when you're asking it too much. I was really afraid, well, what if that means that I need to leave Lockton? Lockton's a great opportunity financially for my family, for me. I work with great people. You know, I love 90% of what I do, which is more than I think a lot of people do. And yet I'm just kind of the person who's always like, well, what else? What next? And, you know, what else does this world have to offer? And so I was terrified that doing this work originally would mean that I would leave and give this all up. And it wasn't until I actually wrote down the sentence, I am going to leave Lockton. I actually wrote that down. And then I was like, so what does that mean? And then I could write down finally all the other things that I was maybe interested in and I was really able to wrestle with this concept of like, all right, so what would life look like? And I was actually able to decide, no, for now and the foreseeable future, like this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. But it wasn't until I was able to like mentally give it up on paper in a riskless environment and it probably took me a couple months before I was comfortable enough to like write that on a piece of paper. Yeah. So for anyone listening, like take the thing you're afraid of as hard as it is and just write it down as if that were true. And then what does that mean? And, you know, you throw it away. You don't have to do anything with it. It's like the pillow, right? Like I could return it. Like you can throw that in the wastebasket and be like, I don't even want to do that again. But it was pretty powerful for me.
Yeah, that's so good. It's just, again, that funny wiring in our brains that we have as humans where you can intellectually know that no one's going to come take your job away if you write down, I don't want to be at this job on paper, but it's still terrifying because it might lead to action that you don't feel prepared to take. And I think so much of life, at least I believe, so much of life is running towards whatever that fear is and looking it in the eyes and deciding, what do I want to do with it?
Yeah.
And
which is great. And I believe that too. Let's start with the baby steps for people.
Exactly what I was just going to say. It starts with inoculation, right? Like what's a small thing that you're afraid? I can think of another client I have that she is in a family business and is doing great work, has a hard relationship with some of the family, and was very afraid of a lot of these things, including having hard conversations with the family. Well, we didn't start out day one with like, hey, march into your sister's office and have a really hard conversation. We started with, all right, well, what are some hard workouts that you want to start doing? What's something you've been putting off? We just started to inoculate doing hard things, little bits of doing hard things, taking on what Chet would call chosen suffering. And then the better she got at that, eventually she got to the place where she just recently was like, yeah, I got to go have this really hard conversation. I've already set it up. Here's what I'm planning to do. But I'm like, great. I don't need to do a thing. Like, you've got this. But it doesn't start out with doing the hardest thing you can possibly do first. You've got to, just like anything else, build the muscle for it, build a skill.
Yeah. Love that. One question I do want to ask you, and I kind of smirk because you and I have talked about this a lot. So we're talking about having this dream, right? And we're talking about coming up with this. So in the process, I think there's another fear here, which is like, well, what if I just don't have a dream? Or what if I have multiple dreams, right? Like I don't necessarily want to be Tom Brady and the best quarterback the world has ever seen, or Michael Jordan, the best basketball player, or the top violinist, or whatever the case might be. Like I don't need to be best in the world at something. We often think that like, or I guess like the message we often get is like, you have to have this dream and you have to want to be the best at whatever that thing is. And that is what purpose is. What are your beliefs around that? And how do you coach your clients or build into your clients when it comes to defining their purpose?
I remember this conversation with you because I remember having a moment where I was surprised. You said something, and I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of like, I just hear Chet talk about all the time in team practices, like you got to uncover your passion and do that thing. And it suddenly hit me. I was like, oh, wait, you think that you have to have the passion like Chet does, which is building, and that's the way. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, I get it. Which for you, I say this all the time in love, like you're such a weirdo in the best way. Like I love working with weirdos, right? You're very comfortable being somebody who is different from others.
Yep.
And for you have this, what's the word?
Polymath
side to you, where you get a lot of joy out of being very good at a lot of different things. Great. Let's make that the dream. And the more you wrote about that, the more you wrote about wanting the juice from being excellent at a lot of different things versus the best at one thing, the more your opus, your dream state kind of wrote itself. And you got more and more comfortable, I would say, with I'm good with just being really, really good at a lot of different things that bring me joy. Mm-hmm. So to your question, your dream is your dream. What dreams come out of, so it's again BTL terms, opus, what your dream state comes out of. If you look in your core, hopefully your core or your opus reflects your core, but you're going to see a lot of both identity and passion in there. Who am I and what do I love to do? Those things should be all over your opus. Well, who are you? Man, you're somebody that loves writing. You're somebody that loves fitness. You have all these different interests and you love doing a lot of those different things. Great. Let's make that your opus.
Yeah. Yeah, that was powerful for me when you were like, well, your dream could just be to do it all. And I was like, oh, it can? Mm-hmm. You can do that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was interesting. And that would be my encouragement for anyone listening is like, if you know the one thing, like my wife grew up, she wanted to be a ballet dancer and she became a professional ballerina and like that was her thing. And she was so solely focused on that. And that was awesome. And I envy her in some ways for that. I'm the total opposite. Like I've never wanted to be the absolute best at anything except being good at everything. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, for me, what my dream now looks like is much different than what my wife's look like. And, just accepting that that's okay. And I think you can look when you can step back, you and I talk about this too, is like often our lives, like I had this imagery in my head during one of our practices where it was like, I'm painting this mural, which is my whole life. And if I'm always up at the wall painting, maybe I'm painting something really good right here, but then I'm kind of like moving on to the next thing. And it's only when you take a second and take a step back and look at the whole thing that you can see the patterns and what needs to be adjusted and then maybe course correct on what the rest of that mural needs to look like. And so we spend so much of our lives up at the mural painting it. It is helpful to take a step back. And I think this kind of like opus or dream creation is just another example of that. You can sit and be like, well, is this my passion? Is this my passion? Is this my passion? I like doing all these things. Should I want to do them more? Should I give some of them up? But it was only when I like stepped back from the wall and looked at it, I was like, oh no, my life is always this combination of things. Mm-hmm. And maybe I should just lean into that aspect, that theme of my life that I started to get much more comfort around what that passion was.
Yeah, that's a great image. I think what never struck me until now as you're talking about that is as you're standing back and looking at it, you're seeing all these different pieces of it. And is there harmony throughout all of that? And for you, getting clarity that Lockton is the place you want to be because so much of what you do love, you get to do at Lockton. Mm-hmm. Whether it's writing does come into play at Lockton. There are things that you love to do that you get to do at Lockton while still dabbling in some of the other things you enjoy too. So your tapestry as a whole has a lot of harmony to it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like Simon Sinek's start with why, right? Like you need to go out and live and have enough experiences to be able to look back and see the patterns. Mm-hmm. And that's really how his whole exercise for how to create your why is you have to be able to look back and see what are the things that are common about all the things that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it.
I want to wrap up with this. You managed to flip the script back on me a few times. So let's flip it back to you one more time.
All right.
What elements of this work have most impacted your own life?
What elements of the work? I mean, I think it's just as simple as I write every day, and I especially write when something feels off, something doesn't feel quite right. That to me has been the greatest gift to my life of helping me sync up what I believe and how I behave. First, getting clarity, where are those things at odds? And then, okay, what's the work I need to do to kind of bring them back in alignment? That's probably the biggest thing that has been a game changer for me. And then to have someone like Chet, who you know very well, in my ear every Thursday morning at 6:45, telling me how I can do it better, more, harder, whatever. You know, that's been such a huge piece of this for me as well. I think it also just has opened me up to feedback. I'm so much clearer on who I am and so much more confident in that generally that, man, I'd love to hear it doesn't bother me a whit to hear from anyone about what they think I should be doing differently. And one of two things are going to happen. I'm going to quickly rinse it through my core and realize it's not at all in alignment with who I am. Thanks for the feedback, doing nothing with it. Or, oh man, okay, that hits me between the eyes. That is something that I need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Last question. What is a story that you changed, that you used to tell yourself that you now have a different story for?
So I've always been wired to challenge, for sure. That's just in my DNA. But I used to be very reactive. And I had this story in my head that I would not be controlled. And I was never going to let someone control me. And that came from my childhood. You know, I grew up in a very conservative Christian environment, and I was gay. So from an early age, that was just, I felt, whether it was true or not, it was perceived that I was being controlled, right? And so I grew up without realizing that hidden story of like, no one's going to control me. I remember I would have board meetings when I was running the nonprofit, and I'd have to gear up for these once a month board meetings and feel like, man, here come these guys who are never around. They're going to tell me what they believe I should be doing. And I'd walk out like steam coming out of my ears, ready to fight. And what I started to realize is when I give away my self-control is really when I'm being controlled, and it's my own doing. I'm walking the cage from the inside, right? So for me, that ability to like let go of that piece, realize that literally no one has the power to control me. It then gave me comfort to challenge from a place of love, to challenge with a clear head, and to get it right, not to be right.
Yeah.
That was a game changer. It allowed me to be a better partner, better mom now, better friend, better builder. It was a game changer.
Yeah. And it's so funny how some of these might sound somewhat trivial, but they feel so significant, and they have such a huge impact across your whole life. Like, I think we had only been working together for maybe 2 months when Caitlin was like, my wife was like, man, I don't know what work you're doing, but it's working. And I was like, really? And she's like, oh yeah. Like you the last month and a half, you've totally shown up different. And you know, we hadn't even gotten into much of the heavy stuff yet. So just reshaping these stories, and again, not creating false stories, not trying to get yourself to convince a different story, but actually doing the work and coming up with what you think is a real story that might be different from the original story. It becomes so powerful because now, like, we operate every day out of our beliefs. It's just how we behave comes from what we believe and what we think. And so if you just change the operating system, or you change that underlying programming, your behavior changes, even if you don't notice it. That's
right. Change the inputs to get different outputs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that hour went by quickly.
That was fun.
Rachel, we will link to Built to Lead, link to you. Anyone who wants to learn more about this, you can reach out to me directly. I also love these conversations, and happy to share my experience or anything else around Built to Lead, or this kind of work that might be helpful for you who are listening. Rachel, anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, thanks for, doing the work. Makes my life a lot of fun. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you as well, and grateful for everything that you have done for me and my family, and just helping me live a better, happier life, because that's what it's all about. Just enjoying our time here on this earth.
Giddy up.
All right. Good luck, everybody.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.